All right, well, we're going to get started. My name is Ashley Wilson. I was on a BiggerPockets podcast not too long ago. I'm not sure if you were able to capture it or not, but I spoke at the time very briefly about some apartment syndications that we're doing, and I'm actually down in Houston, Texas right now at one of the properties we just purchased. So we purchased a 124-unit apartment building in Alvin, Texas, which is a secondary market of Houston. And I'm fortunate enough to have Courtney Vitek from Citygate on the call with us today. And she is going to go over everything that she is doing as a miracle maker here at the property. So thank you so much, Courtney, for joining me today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure, and I'm excited to be speaking with everybody, chiming in today.
Courtney is a true superstar, and if you're lucky to get to work with her, you will be absolutely blessed. So I've only worked with her for a brief period so far, but it's been tremendous, and I can't get over how on top of everything she is, and we're going to talk about that a little bit further when we talk about property management and how property management works with apartments, especially when you buy a apartment that needs some renovation, such as this property. So this property, the play is a value add. There's obviously some deferred maintenance, and the plan is to come in and to renovate the property, add some value to the property, which then will be able to increase the rent. And if you know about multifamily already, you know that by increasing the rent, it has a direct correlation to the value of the property. Unlike single-family homes where the price point is based off of comparable sales, apartments, it's very hard to do that because it's very hard to compare apples to apples. So you can actually directly create appreciation in your multifamily by renovating the apartment. So that's what we're going to cover today, specifically about transitioning the unit. So the first thing I want to get started is I want to ask Courtney, what do you think is the benefits of having a property management company versus self-management? A lot of apartment buildings have self-management, and with this property we mentioned it's 124 units, so it's obviously a little bit larger of a property. So go ahead.
Pardon me. Yeah. So obviously I wouldn't have a job if we didn't have property management. This is what I do and what I'm passionate about. So pardon my bias up front, but I really feel that property management companies and professionals bring forth to owners, especially that are new or green in the industry, liability coverage, knowledge, contacts, market knowledge that you're not going to have otherwise. And then also just time to manage your assets so that you can either A, have more, producing more money for yourself, or B, that you're not having to spend that much time of your own in the day-to-day, because this is a full-time job for, 5-6 team members, not including our corporate side. So there's a lot of positives to having a property management company, and what we bring to the table, I've not been able to see done independently, but there's people who do it every day and they're successful. So
great, thank you so much. And then the next question, a lot of times there's discussion on whether or not you would like an in-house maintenance team covering the renovations that you plan versus outsourcing that. So what are your thoughts?
This is personnel specific, and I think anybody can attest to this in any market, that as we're steering kids to go to college, that we're finding labor jobs are harder to fill, right? And the cost for the labor jobs has gone up. So I find that for me, it's easier for me to contract that out than find somebody who's willing to work at a set rate per hour. Anywhere in Houston, our average maintenance guy is $14 to $22 an hour. When you're paying that, but I can paint an apartment for $200, it doesn't make sense at that point to do it in-house. And then also like the skill set of your technicians. Maintenance guys are good at fixing and repairing, but to install new and to have attention to detail isn't always the case. So I always will base that based on the team members I have in place and how proficient they'll be in that exercise.
Great. So what you're doing is basically gauging the staff that's on site and then making it on a case-by-case basis.
Right. Whatever's going to be, again, proficient and beneficial for the owner.
Perfect.
So my job is to ensure that we hit your targets and hit your goals as far as like generating income and quickly filling vacancy.
Great. The next question is, so this property, obviously I mentioned before, is a larger property. So when you're assessing how many staff members you need, obviously there's not a perfect formula, but just an approximation of how do you gauge how many staff members you need on staff to manage the different size apartments.
Right. So I've always been successful with like the industry standard down here is 1 per every 100 units. And so being a little over 100, I make the recommendation that we either have a part-time or a second person. You've got to have a backup. Like somebody can't work 365, 24/7, and that's what our office hours require. So having a secondary team member is really important, but sometimes you can offset that in creative ways, like if you have multiple sites where you can run people and float them. But general rule of thumb is 1 maintenance, 1 management agent per 100 units.
Okay, great. Next thing is, so what are the key steps that you focus on during the first week of takeover? We actually just recently took over this property, so Courtney has been on top of it. We have been getting daily emails right now because just there's a lot to catch up on and a lot to stay on top of. But what are the key things you focus on when you come into a new property?
So typically we will evaluate the team that's in place prior to takeover so that we are prepared to have employees on staff. So if you have a management team and you know that, hey, we're not going to want to keep anybody, maybe we don't interview, but we prepare by having a third-party company assist us, or we have staff brought in the day of. Employees is number 1. And then I follow through with utilities. Like if our water's shut off, nobody's happy. So we'll make sure that we convert all the utilities over within the first 24 hours of having the asset. And then from there, vendor contracts. And then we start to mitigate, like getting on site and assessing the condition of the vacant apartments and occupied units so that we know best where to, again, cut liabilities. Mm-hmm. If I don't know that there's a problem, I can't fix a problem. But sometimes when you're taking over from other companies or other management groups, problems are left for you. So it's really important for us to come in and best protect you guys, the owner, who would take liability if something wasn't taken care of, right?
So just to recapture, obviously we, as I mentioned, want to renovate the apartments and add value to the property, but obviously safety is utmost concern. So we want to make sure that our residents are safe and happy, and safety is always prioritized first. So we like to, no pun intended, but it's safe to say that safety is the priority, followed by adding value. And even though you'd like to come in and add value immediately and bump the rents and get that immediate cash flow, right, increase in cash flow, it's really important to really focus on the safety of the residents first, and then tackle the upgrades for the...
Correct.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Correct.
Perfect. And then next question I have are, what are the typical steps needed to take that you take on getting a unit ready?
So we inspect them, and currently we schedule the paints. Like I said, just depending on your property and how you can make means work with your current maintenance staff. Again, I've never found a maintenance guy who could paint in the amount of time that it takes my contractor to paint for the price they do it. Like the offset isn't there. So we will schedule all of the needed repairs, and then once the contractors leave, maintenance can go in. They can do their preventative maintenance. We actually use a formulated checklist to ensure that we cover all of the key factors. Like we talked about, safety items. In Texas, air is a big one. So is our air conditioner working? And that's a large ticket item. So making sure that we're doing preventative maintenance on that before somebody moves in prolongs the time that you'll have before you have to replace that system. And then we'll clean it and re-inspect it. So anytime that I'm on site, or my managers or my on-site teams, we'll walk a unit up to 3 times before it's made ready. And we do that every day if we have to.
So one of the things Courtney and I were doing earlier today was we were walking the property and we were looking at the units and looking at the exterior. And one of the things we were talking about is when the units are being upgraded and you do start to increase the rents. Obviously, from time to time, you get some you get happy renters, and then you get a few people that may or may not be as happy with the increase in rent. So do you want to tackle like how you handle those types of situations? And I mean, obviously, when you're increasing the rents, there is definitely a high likelihood that you're changing the clientele that are in the property too.
Correct. So again, and this is all dependent on like an owner's plan of action. So if we're looking at a 2-year value add and we're going to be aggressive in a market that's performing and has high occupancy rates, it's almost so sorry that happened, good luck somewhere else, and you can uphold the lease and increase the rents all day. If it's a market that may be struggling and you're in early before that value add's going to hit, but you can forecast that job growth's going to be there in 3 years, we may just kind of teeter in and be more catering to our residents. So it's really just a play-by-play on what the owner's objectives are, what the market's trending before we'll make that assumption. But if I had to deal with a disgruntled resident, you can always give them the option to transfer to another apartment, to stay in their existing apartment without renovations. And then you welcome them, invite them to go shop your comps, because any property that I'm managing, I can assure you, is going to outperform and outshine my competitors. And so I welcome my residents to go find that for themselves. I mean, it's unfortunate that you have some people who are happy with complacency. But we've got to stay progressive in apartments, and it's for their best interest. And I think that they figure that out over time as they see the details and the projects come to completion.
One question that is often asked is whether or not you tackle, once you've addressed the safety issues, whether or not you tackle the exterior versus the interior renovations. Is there a preference you have, or is it a case-by-case basis? How do you handle that?
Market specific, right? So what are the needs of your individual property and what's your market doing? If we were going to speak maybe to this market, the interior rehabs hasn't been pushed aggressively amongst your competitors versus the exterior has. So it's really imperative that the exteriors get taken care of here, but that's our case. And it's really, again, just knowing your comps. And this is where your management company will really come into play, because they already know. They've already been looking at these properties. They've already been touching them, feeling them, talking to other buyers, sellers, and seeing the history of them throughout the time that they've managed in the area. And they can bring a lot of that to you and say, hey, no, we already know that it's getting painted over here, but they're not doing anything inside. And that can help you gauge where to prioritize your expense as well. So...
Another question that often gets asked is, how does the actual process work? So, for example, when you have a project such like this, where you have 124 units, I mean, how do you go about tackling the renovation unit by unit? Are you, while they're off at work, are you renovating the units? Are you kicking them out? Maybe you can speak to that, because there is a lot of uncertainty for people who are not in this space on how that actually happens. So if you want to address that.
Again, that's like a really complex question, not so simple. It depends on your asset. It depends on your project. If you're doing a renovation where it's just a hardware upgrade, or we're just changing a couple things in the apartment because we're going to prioritize an exterior rehab, it's quite likely that you could just work with a resident to do that enhancement in their home. But a lot of times, and depending on where in the country you are and what products you're using, there's a lot of chemicals that you can't use when it's occupied. And it doesn't make sense to displace your resident and pay for a hotel stay because they can't be in their home, or risk letting them stay in their home and the liability of what could happen should they be exposed to said chemicals. So in this case, with your renovation, I would say no, we'll renovate at turn. So they either pay the increase and stay in their apartment, or they don't pay the increase, they move out, or they can transfer to a unit that's been renovated. That's really the best course of action, and that's how you can get a mirror image and consistency in your product. And when you're doing a large scale, 124 units, you want everything to be the same. That is what I've learned to be the best practice. But again, case by case, if it's a 60 unit property and you're doing 5 a year, then however you want.
So specifically to the Houston market, I was just wondering maybe if you could touch on a little bit on the finishes for the different class apartments and what you see trending within Houston for the different class and what you would pick for finishes when you're doing a value add.
That is, again, another complex question, right?
Yeah.
So the way that I learned that, because I'm not a designer and I'm not an interior decorator, is I just pay attention to conversations that are being had. I pay attention to construction developers. I shop new comps. Even if I'm just in an area and something's under construction, I'll go see what they have to gauge. So in this instance, I've paid attention to what the comps don't have, to kind of gear, like, I don't need to invest in granite if nobody else has granite. That's not going to be a finish in this market for any class of property. Formica's going to be across the board, even if it's new construction. Versus if I was in the Loop in Houston, we're going to have quartz countertops and high-end, state-of-the-art appliances. And so I really just pay attention to the market trends and what's popular in that area with that demographic. And that just takes experience. So again, why do you hire a management company? Because they have the experience. They've been doing this long enough, right?
So do you have any good stories for us? Just any fun stories of any value adds that you've done, or
specific on renovations?
Renovations, or I mean any good property management story.
We could spend all day on property management stories, as far as like crazy residents and everything. You know, I really love what I do. I find a lot is gratifying for us in property management because we get to make an impact, especially in value add markets. You're often going into communities that are recycling, lower income communities, and so we're able to provide quality living for people who deserve to live in a quality home. And so for me, that's what I love to do. And having residents come up to me and say, hey, like, thank you. Thank you for having the grounds clean. Thank you for caring. Thank you for letting my kids be able to walk outside and not worry. That's what's rewarding to me. So no set story. I would scare all of you.
So we're going to take a moment now to open it up for questions specific on property management. I know I've seen a couple of questions pop up specific to this actual apartment. I can address those questions after the call, but the live stream. But I'd really like to focus on questions circling around property management, especially because we have Courtney here, and she is one of the most knowledgeable people I've ever met. You're absolutely you're absolutely incredible, and I feel blessed to get to work with you. So
Likewise.
Thank you. If anyone has any questions right now, please feel free to comment in the comments section, and I will try to address them with Courtney here. So let's see what we have. Yeah, so there's one question on, as I mentioned before, about the apartment, the purchase and the game plan, just very high level. We did purchase the property recently, and our game plan is a 3 to 5 year hold with a value add, as I mentioned before, which means renovating the property, bumping the rents, and that obviously creates more value in the property. So that's where we're looking to exit in the 3 to 5 year term. So do we have any other questions here? What would you guys say is the average price of property management? I only ask, well,
last month's rent.
So property management is very specific to the units and the number of units. So the question that's being asked by Jared right now, the quoting of 10%, 10 to 20%, 18%, 20%, with obviously like a single family home or a smaller apartment building like a fourplex or, a 10plex, that nature, obviously the economies of scale aren't there. So wouldn't you agree that the property management fees would be a little bit higher? And then once you get to larger units, there's obviously economies of scale. So then it has a reverse correlation with the number of units for the property management fees.
And I know a lot of companies really, I don't know outside of Texas, but a lot of companies do it based on like your total revenue at a percentage rate. So maybe 3 to 5% of your NOI is how you could calculate a management fee. But those are, group specific and then market specific, I would imagine.
Great. So, okay, let me see. We have another question here. It says, oh, this is a great question. So, Arthur asked, if we had 45 units and an exit plan in 2 years, would you remodel all of them or half of them? That is really a good question. Do you want to give your input?
So my input would be, again, that's market specific.
I completely agree with you.
Right. So if you know that you're going to be able to have tangible income immediately and you can force the vacancy and fill them back up and then immediately target your NOI and know that you're gonna fill up quickly, then I would. But in some markets, like Houston as an example, is really testy. If oil prices are down, then we're not doing great, right? Mm-hmm. If oil prices are up, we're doing phenomenal. And so we have to be cognizant of what do we estimate the job losses are going to be, what new construction's developing in the area. There's so many different key components that can affect your return on that investment. So if it's a short-term hold, then I would just have to know your market to tell you if that was true or not, right?
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. And I also think, too, there is always some difference of opinions on how you look at when you go to exit. So are you looking to leave a little meat on the bone? Are you looking for a stable property that's fully functional, maximize cash flow? And who are you trying to sell? So sell to, like, who's your potential buyer? Because if you have a certain type of buyer who likes everything neat and packaged with a little bow on it, you might want to renovate all 45 of the units. So it really depends.
And what market are you doing? If you're in a notoriously value-add market, then everybody's going to want a little bit of meat on the bone. You're right. To make sure that they can increase the NOI and get a return on their investment too.
Yep. So the next question we have is, can I outsource property management for single-family houses too? Yes or no?
I know of property management groups that do single-family homes on a larger scale. I just don't work for them, so I couldn't tell you about their day-to-day operations, but I do know that they exist here in Houston.
I know that several property management companies across the country actually cater to this. So you can get property management companies that are proficient in single-family homes. So that is something that you would obviously need to look at and do your due diligence to see whether or not it was worth it, but you can absolutely do that. The next question we have is okay, so as you're renovating, how do you go about phasing out renters paying lower rents to bring in new renters at higher rents, a couple at a time, all at once? Does it depend on your budget? Do you want to tackle that?
It depends definitely on what you can afford to lose and your lease expirations. I obviously don't want to force 20 residents out in December because that's not a very proactive season for this market specific. But if I was going to force vacancy, and I've had great success in the past and gotten returns, you just bring them to your renovated rate. You either pay for the renovations or you transfer to the renovations. So either way, your resident's paying that premium. And if they really want to stay in their apartment and not have the upgrades, well, then it's a win-win for you. You've raised the rents and you're collecting additional income with no cost to yourself.
So the next question we have is there a general rule of, I'm going blind here. Is there a general rule of thumb for the best value on what to renovate or improve on multifamily unit, or does it depend on the unit?
I think it depends on the market and the property itself. Right? Like if I could have the prettiest interiors and then need an exterior paint job and that would fix everything versus I could have nothing on the interiors and the exterior is great. It's really just going to depend on the asset and what's been given to it already and then what the needs and the demand in the market are.
So the next question is, if you had several apartment complexes and had very close family members that needed help, would you or let them in a unit rent-free to help them, say, a mom or a dad.
No. So we don't even give our on-site employees free rent anymore. I mean, I think that's like the way of the 80s, and that's kind of been phased out. So at our company and where I've worked in the past, which is very reputable companies, we don't do free rent for anyone.
I would have to agree here, and I'm hoping I'm not getting you in trouble with family members, but I would have to agree because there's a lot of reasons why it's more beneficial. Potentially, you could be helping your parents out a little bit better in the longer run by having the rent, which would help the value of your property immensely, and then obviously being able to place your parents somewhere else that might be a better situation. And furthermore, it gets a little bit touchy. We're getting comments that it's a little cold-hearted, not even mom or dad. I'm not saying to put mom or dad out on the street, but I think finding an alternative place for them, I think, is better for everyone in the long run.
Right.
But sometimes I think it's a little bit of a touchy situation, but I do completely understand the predicament that you're in. So I hope your parents weren't actually listening to the answer to that question, because I'm sorry, Arthur, it might not be the answer you actually wanted. Okay, so switching over to BiggerPockets on Facebook, we have a few questions there. So the one question is, how is the market in Charlotte, North Carolina for multifamily less than 10 units? That's something I think that maybe you should do some research, talk to people within the area, do some market research to identify what market is good for you. There are a lot of different things to look for when you're looking for multifamily, and it also always depends on the investor. That's why you see people investing throughout the entire country. So people have different opinions and different viewpoints, so you really have to identify your own criteria for what you're looking for in your investment, identify both your short and long-term goals, and then match those goals with the area you want to invest, and make sure that is consistent with the strategy that you have outlined to get to your long-term plan. So make sure to just do your due diligence for everything, whether it's multifamily, single family, notes, whatever you're investing in. Make sure you're always doing your due diligence. A question here: why plan to exit if a property is producing positive cash flow? That's a great question, John. Actually, that's a question I had when I first started learning about multifamily. I don't know if you want to answer it, but I can answer it. So I can answer it. When I started looking into multifamily, just to be perfectly honest and transparent, I was questioning, if you have positive cash flow, why are you exiting the property? It doesn't make sense to me. But you actually realize the biggest gain once you do a renovation and bump up the rents. So you actually add the most amount of value to your property, and you can then take that value by selling the property, taking out your initial investment plus the profits, and then put it into another property and then get that yield. So if you're talking about a long-term investment strategy, it actually is better over the long run to continue to be honest, as my husband says, apartment investing when you're doing value adds is really like flipping on steroids. So if you think about it in that sense, I mean, it does have that cash flow perspective that flipping doesn't have. And then there's a lot of other components to multifamily which make it more advantageous than, let's say, single flipping. But, there's also some benefits to flipping too. So we won't get into that more than what I've just mentioned now. But the value is obviously realized sooner than just holding it for cash flow. But you might want to hold it for cash flow. It really, once again, depends on your investment strategy and what your long-term goals are. So we have another question here. It looks like we're going to bump back over to YouTube. Is it a must to increase rents every year? If so, by how much?
So that is, again, know your market, know your market, know your market. And I'll give you a prime example. Class A market in Houston in 2012 increased rents at 12 to 24% in 1 year. Oil and gas was booming, and there was not enough housing for how many jobs were coming in. And then oil and gas wasn't booming anymore. And so we had to be cognizant as our renter base trickled out of Houston, and it was astronomical, to not raise rents. Like, they couldn't afford anymore. And so that year, maybe we did a $5 increase, maybe. But you have to be cognizant to all of the factors, is my point there. And what is the economy doing? What's coming up around you? You can most definitely be aggressive, and I don't think anybody's ever going to lose a resident over $5. Like, my rule of thumb is I'm not moving for $5. For me, that's $60 for the whole year, and you're going to spend $300 to get a moving truck, right? But I would always be cognizant to really what you can push. And then when the market's good, be aggressive. Don't be afraid to challenge it and test the waters and go after it, because I'd rather be 95% occupied at higher rents than 100% occupied at lower rents all day.
So we just want to thank you very much for tuning in. I want to personally thank Courtney for joining me today.
Thank you.
It's an honor to have you on the live stream. I really hoped you enjoyed the topic of apartments and transitioning of apartments, and I really hope you enjoyed Courtney as much as I enjoy working with her. I just want to give a little plug for my next live stream, which will happen on August 1st, and I will be tackling working with family, which I get asked more than probably any other question. It seems like a lot of people want to work with family, and there are pros and cons to working with family, and maybe I'll be able to get one of my family members to be on the call with me if I'm not going to kill him that day or something like that. No, we have a love-hate relationship all the time, so we're really close, and I hope you'll tune in and join us for that call. So thank you again, Courtney. I really appreciate it. And
thanks for everybody who listened.
Yeah, thank you everyone for tuning in. I just want to let you know that you can still post questions, and we'll be answering the questions after the live stream. But I want to thank you again for tuning in, and I hope to see you August 1st at 1 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. So thank you very much. All right, take care.
Thanks.
Bye.